ready? We're almost done. We got two more speakers. These two speakers are, they're just guys that I have so much respect for. They're amazing speakers, best-selling author, international business owner, lane changer, baby, lane changer. This man is the man. Please put your hands together for Lane Ethridge.
A few hundred years ago, there was a guy that if he were to walk through those back doors right now, I can guarantee that all the guys would want to be like him and all the women would probably want to be with him. He had everything from the tangible assets to the intangible assets. And yet the reality was that there was one thing that he wanted more than anything in the entire world. And as I know as each of you sit here today, there's something on your heart that you've been striving for, that you are yearning for every single day, and yet you have not achieved it. You see, this gentleman on paper was amazing. In person, he was amazing. He was the kind of guy that would give everything to help somebody else succeed. And yet the one thing that he wanted more than anything in the entire world, Lori might be able to help him get, and that was real estate. You see, guys, he got a letter in the mail from the king that was giving him the opportunity to acquire the one thing that he wanted more than anything. Many times we go through life and we're sitting there waiting for an opportunity, and oftentimes Matthew 7:7 suggests that we ask, seek, knock, yet that when the door is open, we sit there and complain about the doorbell or that the peephole is too small. You see, this guy was very different. He took action. When he was given an opportunity, he actually went for it. Now you got to understand that back then with the times, the communication and the transportation was a little bit more difficult than today. And so by foot, he had to go hundreds of miles to meet the king. Many of us won't even show up 5 miles down the road to meet the opportunity that will give us anything we need in order to succeed. Yet this guy was different, like many of you. And when he got that letter, he prayed about it. He said, you know what, it's my opportunity. It's my time. I'm going to go do this without knowing everything. And for 200 miles, walking over a week to get to this particular castle, to meet the king for the opportunity that was before him, his heart started beating faster, like many of us as we get towards our dreams. And as he's coming over the final hill in order to see the castle, understanding that his dreams are right before him, he sees the door start coming down, and the kingsmen come out to greet him. Excited and emotional, he starts to realize that his dreams are coming closer and closer. And as the kingsmen greet him, he said, "Sir, we know who you are. The king is awaiting your arrival." He's escorted down a long corridor with the most amazing paintings along the entire wall, much like in this room. And as the door opens to the kitchen with a table 60 foot long, he starts to walk down to the king. The king says, "Have a seat, sir. Tomorrow morning when you wake up, I'm going to give you the opportunity to acquire the most land you have ever had. Not only that, it's going to be the most abundant land. Are you up for the challenge?" He said, "Yes, sir. I just came 200 miles. What's next?" The king says, "What I'm going to do is I'm going to send you on a journey tomorrow as soon as the sun rises. And as the sun rises, whatever land you can physically touch with your 2 feet, all of it will be yours." Yet exacerbated and tired from a long journey, he goes to bed, much like we do on Christmas Eve, excited about the gift that he's about to be given. And as the sun rises, he starts taking off on his journey, and he starts running and running and running, and eventually he gets so far away that he realizes what the king said. Half the way past, miles and miles and miles away, he realizes that at that moment, the king had told him that if you don't get back to the finish line by the time the sun sets, none of that property will be yours. You see, guys, so often we want things in life, and yet the reality is that we don't put a timeline on it, and therefore we just hope that it will happen. As he starts making his way back, much like I do when I run at Torrey Pines, realizing my car is 10 miles that way and I have to do 20 miles total. You see, he starts moving back, and just like the journey that he had done there, yet the reality is he's so tired. Many of us are in that journey right now as entrepreneurs. We're so exhausted, we're so exasperated, we have no idea how we're going to take that physical next step. And you see, guys, as he starts running as fast as he can, realizing that none of it's going to be his if he doesn't reach the goal in time, as he comes over that same final hill, he realizes that the sun is setting faster than he's physically able to run. And as that sun is setting, he literally dies. And he lands 3 inches short of the finish line. The kingsmen this time come out and they greet him, realizing that he had actually just perished chasing after his dreams. And guys, what was the one thing he wanted more than anything? And at the end of his life, he needed 3 foot by 6 foot plot of land. Guys, you see, the reality is, as entrepreneurs, we run so fast and so furious that sometimes we don't even know where we're going. My goal by the end of our conversation is to hopefully give you the tools and the techniques that you can use in your business to go achieve them without killing yourself along the way. So as I share my journey, understand that as Les Brown says, his son is going to be here in a minute. It's not to impress you, but to impress upon you the importance of hopefully implementing it into your life so that you can do the same thing. Where's Eric? I used to teach Eric as a middle school math teacher in Rockville, Maryland. 12 and 13-year-olds teaching them math, pre-algebra and algebra. And guys, what I loved about teaching was that it actually taught me more about entrepreneurship until I realized that I didn't even know it until I started discovering how to implement it into my life. And I want to share with you guys first 2 things that I learned from teaching that I hope that you can implement into your life. But before I get to those, what I need you guys to understand is this, that in order to be a teacher or a best-selling author, sometimes you have to become a best-selling reader. Or you have to become a best-selling pupil in order to learn from the people that are willing to impart their wisdom, knowledge, and expertise onto you. Yet so often our ego gets in the way and we say they're not worth sitting down and talking to. Thrive Talks isn't worth spending a full day because we don't realize the value that we can actually achieve from under other people. And as I started teaching my first year in school, the curriculum was a total BS concept. And after reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad that first summer and teaching, whether you like the human behind the book or the message, that doesn't matter. Whether you like the book or not, that doesn't matter. For me at the time in my particular life, teaching, realizing that I was about to give 30 to 40 years of my entire life to go teach children that a Scantron would dictate their intelligence, which would then the government or the occupation that they were going to go after was going to dictate how expensive they were willing to pay them. And guys, understand this. I want you to write this down, that for the first time, and men, I need you guys to hear this, that faith stands for full assurance in the heart. You see, too often we get stuck in our head, and the problem is that we're not smart enough to outweigh our heart, and therefore we will never win. We're setting ourselves up for success. But too often we have to reach failure on that journey. And so as I started teaching, what really happened for me was that the mentoring part of it, that we call tutoring in the public school system, was the opportunity to really understand what people need. And as one of my students came and sat down with me at lunch and told me that he understands that he doesn't pay attention in class. He doesn't really care to pay attention in class. And at first I was frustrated. I taught him 6 different ways to figure out Pythagorean theorem, but the reality is that he was worried about going home to get abused, beaten, molested, and therefore a teacher can never do anything to fulfill the gap that a parent or a mentor has to do in his or her life. And we have wounds in this room. We've heard some of them. You know what, guys? The reality is that each of us is broken. But we're never broken because of the love that we have for the Creator that made us. And that moment when those kids would come in one after another and explain their situation to Mr. E, not that they were failing because they weren't smart enough, it's because they were too afraid of the circumstances and repercussions in their home life. That's when I realized that the first time part of my mission in life was to help as many people as I could. With whatever gifts I have, I'm going to help them. And guys, understand this, that as entrepreneurs, Pythagorean theorem, for those of you who don't remember, is a squared plus b squared equals? So how in the world are you going to solve for C if you can't know A and B? Exactly. And yet the reality is my teaching students, many of us in this age, maybe besides Eric, had to memorize multiplication tables. So if I say 4 times 4, you say? If I say 3 plus 3? I get it. If you're a history guy, you didn't get that one. That's okay. But see, we had to memorize this stuff. The children, as I was teaching in the No Children Left Behind concept, were getting further and further behind. They didn't have basic arithmetic skills, so how in the world could they put it in an order of operations? Please excuse my dear aunt. Because the order of operations is going to dictate their ability to fulfill the answer on the quiz. And yet, guys, as entrepreneurs, what I discover over and over again in the different areas that I've been in, all the coaching, just like Jeff, is that you cannot solve for C unless you have the basic ability to do addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. My question to you as you sit here and explore all the opportunities that are before you with all the speakers, what are those things in your business that you need to do? I will tell you the number one thing that I believe that every single person in this room, despite what vehicle you're driving in the fast lane, this is one, and it's called prospecting. Prospecting means the ability to connect with somebody on a level that may give you opportunity to move them and empower them into action to do something. Whether it's to buy your product, do your service, or whatever you want. The reality, guys, is this, that oftentimes people say, well, I'm in business or I'm an entrepreneur because I just want to help people. Good, great. The more people you help, the more money you're going to make. And so when I talk about prospecting, I'm not talking about it from the standpoint of the most popular radio station in the world, WIIFM. Nobody cares about that. You guys understand that radio station? What's in it for me? You see, the reality is when you're such a good prospector and you build such a network and a database of people, you can help your clients like Brian LaPrath back there. You can help your clients like Brenda. You can help your clients around the world because you're able to connect them with somebody that you're not capable of fulfilling that. So what I want you guys to understand is Pythagorean theorem. I didn't learn this until after building my third business. That I didn't have the base foundational principle like my kids, yet I made fun of them in class when they got C's and D's and E's. But I didn't look at the self-reflection as I got counsel and mentor from my mentors, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to obtain the information that I already had from kids. You see, guys, my journey started from there. Is it okay if I share you? Do I have permission to share that with you?
Yes.
Awesome. So what happened is I read that book and I literally quit teaching the next summer. I got a coin and I've lived most of my life with the big life decisions by a head or a tail. Am I suggesting that's the best way? God, no. There are times in which you should have actual tangible steps, but when you're a high I, when you're a right brain guy, you kind of go and go and go until you figure things out. Anybody familiar with ADD? What's worse than that? ADHD. What's worse than that? Anybody familiar with ADOS? Attention deficit. Oh, squirrel. You see, the reality, guys, is I'm just chasing so much that every squirrel that came into my life, yes, that's a good opportunity, yes, that's a good opportunity. And the reality is whatever lane I was in, it didn't matter because I didn't understand the lane I was in. I was excited about the next vehicle or the next turn that could have gotten me where I want to go. And I'm not suggesting that that's not important. What I'm suggesting is that when you get in your own lane, the right one for you that God has placed in your life that you're just on the journey to figure out, at that moment, there is no traffic. Does it mean there's no roadblocks? Does it mean that it's not going to be super expensive to build your business and that there's not toll roads every single place? No, but what it means is that you got in the right lane and the opportunity will open up over and over and over again, much like Lori talked about, as long as you nurture that and continue to succeed. So as I left everything I knew, 3,500 miles back home in Maryland, where I just flew in for the weekend to be here, my journey 8 years ago started in San Diego, California as an entrepreneur. I was making $0 when I arrived here in San Diego, California. Looking on Craigslist for my first opportunity, I got my first job. Guess what they were willing to pay me? $0. So I was making the same amount of money, but guess what? I had a direction and a path to go on and mentors that were there going to teach me, and that wisdom and knowledge has paid me literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And guys, understand it's not about the money. You guys understand that, right? It's what can that money do for you? I made 150 cold calls every single day. Probably out of those were 130 connects. We talked about it with Steve, right? 20 connects a day. Out of that, maybe 10% success. I'm setting up 2 appointments. Understand this, that it was a very, very challenging time. And I suggested that you can't become a best-selling author until you become a best-selling. So I got to work. And I suggest that each single one of you buy whatever book is here, take it home, pick one, and read it. Don't read all of them because they're not going to help you. Pick the one that falls on your heart and go after that one. That one happened to be a book called Think and Grow Rich. Anybody familiar with it? If you're not, I suggest you read it. I'm not going to ruin the outline or the finishing for you because it was written in the 30s, so too late, right? You can go read it. Yet the reality is that I became the character in that book because R.U. Darby had moved from Maryland during the gold strike to California to hopefully fulfill his dreams of becoming wealthy. I just moved from Maryland to California to go after something that I didn't know what the success was. I didn't understand it. Yet the reality is that that book became part of who I was, and those concepts that Napoleon Hill taught have become part of who I am. And you see, guys, I read that book every single night. And when I was at the lowest of my lows, without going into the story behind it, understand that that book led me to the next book, which changed my life forever. As I got my first job and I started working every single day from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., my car got repoed. My grandmother died within a month of being in San Diego, California. The IRS was knocking on my door. I had credit card debt, $40,000. And I want to tell you guys this right now. Wherever you're starting from, understand that we understand where you're coming from. I get it. When my car got repoed and I had to steal somebody's bike, and yes, that's a dark time in my life, I had to get around. And driving through McDonald's to take ketchup packets home is not real fun. But when you want to have tomatoes, and that's the best way that you can do it for some nutrients, I get it. Until I realized that you can't have $1 million body if you're eating from the dollar menu. Amen? but it was a means to an end. And sometimes Les Brown and John is here somewhere, you got to be hungry, right? Yet the reality is I went to bed every single night because I was hungry until I got hungry. The next book that fell in my lap was a book called 3 Feet from Gold. Many of you are familiar. The author of that lives here in San Diego. And I read this book and it changed my life forever. Not necessarily the book that he had written with Sharon Lecter. The reality is there was a letter in that book that jumped into my heart. It was a letter that Napoleon Hill had written to his wife during his 20-year journey of entrepreneurship to write this book with how much money? 0. The same I was making during my first 2 occupations. The letter said, look, honey, I understand I'm not making a lot of money. All I need is your support, and I promise I will bring home the bacon. Men in the room, does that word bacon jump out at you? Especially when you're going to bed at night after eating a can of tuna and that's all you got? Yeah, see, that jumped in my stomach, but the one that jumped in my heart was the word support. Because I didn't have that. From the one person that I wanted more than anything, she wasn't there when I needed it the most. I realized as I laid my head on the pillow that night, before what changed my life forever the next morning, was that no matter what happens, I have to sleep with myself every single night. And until I'm gone, every single morning I wake up, I get the joy and pleasure of waking up next to the most beautiful man in the entire world. Guys, this book changed my life so much that I actually went out and I bought a yardstick. I drove down on my bike to Garnett Avenue. It's the Staples. And I bought a yardstick and I carried that thing everywhere with me for the next 400 days, just over a year. Understand that it was just a means to an end for me to never give up when I needed to not give up. At the time, not for me because I'm not important. But God put me on earth to help create something in somebody else that's going through something that my journey can help them along the way. As I'm carrying this yardstick, I get an opportunity for the first time becoming the top sales guy in that company to speak at my first event. And I'm up on stage and I'm speaking and I don't even talk about the yardstick. I just offer opportunity to come be a real estate investor. At the time, that's what we were doing. And you see, what changed my life that day was 5 individual people, but the first 4 were not that important. I don't mean as people they weren't, that I didn't unconditionally love them for humans. What I mean is that they wanted to buy my product and that was not going to do anything for me. Hopefully it would for them. Yet the 5th gentleman that came up and talked to me and said, I'm not here to do this. I was the first guy to short sell my house in San Diego. You're teaching short sale flipping business. I get it. Why in the world do you have that yardstick? And you see, I looked him in the eye, Danny, and I shook his hand. And I said, look, I've read this book called 3 Feet from Gold, and it changed my life forever. I don't know you, I don't know your story, but if you've ever wanted to give up, I encourage you to go read that book. He looks me back in the eye and he says, my name is Greg, and I'm the author of that book.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing.
And guys, for the first time in my life, I met somebody that actually had an ability to transform my life in a way at the time that I needed him, to learn the things that I needed in order to get to the next level, to hopefully transition and transpose the information and wisdom that I had gotten onto other people. I was invited to go be his vice president, and I did that for a year. I learned the speaking gig. I understood what it took to really follow the lead that I wanted to do, but the reality is I got fired 6 times by a man that at the time was writing a book called Stickability from the Napoleon Hill Foundation. You talk about stickability, if you want to do that, you show up 6 times when you're fired 5. Get the nickname Gumshoe because you can't get rid of me. And guys, you understand that the individual person is not as important as what they can impart in wisdom in you that they can help draw out of you to become. You see, when he fired from me for the 6th time, I said, but I still owe you. He said, you will never, ever pay a debt that you don't owe. Guys, I think too often in life we owe it to all these other people to be successful, and we owe it to them because they're successful, and we want to repay them for all the wisdom they've given us. The reality is that we owe it to ourselves. And the best way to help your mentor is to go do what they tell you, successfully, and then willingly, without asking for compensation, the majority of the time to go impart that into other people. Yet as entrepreneurs, would you agree that we're more valuable than the cost we typically charge? Jim Rohn suggested we get paid for the value that we provide to the marketplace. And so that 6th time as I was driving home, self-talk, any self-talkers in the room? Show of hands. Keep them up if you answer your own questions. You see, guys, this is one of those opportunities where I was driving home. And I started talking to myself. I said, Lane, you got to change yourself if you want to get to hang out with the Les Browns of the world. If you want to go hang out with the Zig Ziglars and all these guys and all these people that we're reading that we consider our mentors, but we've never actually met. And as I'm literally changing lanes, as I'm talking about Lane changing himself, I realized that my opportunity and the lowest point in my life was actually becoming the biggest blessing. I started the company a year and a half ago called Changing Lanes, and we've been on an amazing journey helping people around the world transform and figure out what lane they need to be in so they can get into the fast lane for themselves. And guys, you see the coolest part about this whole thing? How many of you guys hate driving in San Diego? How many of you hate driving anywhere? You see, what I've learned is that the HOV lane is one of the best places to be, the carpool lane. Why is that? Because the government has regulated that you can actually go faster and further if you have somebody else in your car with you. And so as I've been a competitor of my entire life from everything I've done, and I will not lose ever. It's as simple as that. If you're faster than me, I'll run harder. And I won't stop until we're done with the race. If it's a mile race, we go 2. It's as simple as that. But the reality is that what I've learned is that collaborative competition is so much better than just competition in and of itself. I am no good unless I'm with people who are better than me. And our entire life has been helping other people become important with us as the back burner, because too often as an egotistical Leo who thrives and prides himself on being in front of people, I've learned that the only reason I'm in front of it is because God gave me a story to go share with other people, and that's the only reason I'm up here today. It is literally the only reason I flew out here, took time away from my family beach week to come to San Diego, California to help you guys. Because 90% of the time, the stuff you got to do for being an entrepreneur, guess what? You're going to hate it. But the 10% joy that you get from that is why we get up in the morning. And if you don't have that 10% joy, perhaps it's time to make a shift and find a lane that's correct for you. And so we've been on an amazing journey of sharing opportunities. And I remember back to one of my times with Short Sale Pros. It was a company, my first opportunity that I told you guys about. There was a lady named Jenny that I met while I was prospecting one day. And Jenny is probably the most influential person in my life without knowing it because of what she did in and through me and for me at a time in which her life was the most challenging that she's ever been through. And as I continued to move forward and I continued to do things, I never forgot about Jenny. You see, guys, there was a moment in my life where I was very new to San Diego, and I told you about some of the stuff that was happening. I was very unfamiliar with June gloom. Yet I decided that I wanted to get into the Word. I had gotten far away from my faith, and I don't mean foolish ignorance of the heart. I mean my Christianity. I knew that I needed a connector here because it's upward, inward, and then outward. And so I decided that moment that I wanted to read this book that I had no idea about, much like Shakespeare. And so I had this companion that taught me how to read this other book, and I decided that I wanted to go down to Torrey Pines, the most beautiful haven in the entire world to meet. And yet the reality is it was 50 degrees, it was one of those June gloom days, and I'm wearing a sweatshirt, freezing, trying to figure out what this book is telling me. And as I look up for the first time about a half an hour, this presence starts coming towards me. And I can't make out anything. It's this dark shadow that continues to get closer. And being new to your faith, sometimes you're like, oh, this is not very cool. Not what I signed up for. And yet as the figure got closer, I could start to make out the countenance, and it was that of Jenny. Jenny looked at me, and for the first time, literally the first thing she said to me was, Lane, I absolutely hate you. I said, thank you, Jenny. Why is that? Because guys, understand when somebody's giving you feedback, it has nothing to do with you. It has single thing to do with the lenses of which they're looking at you through. The second thing she said is, Lane, I absolutely adore you, and I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I said, Jenny, whatever I can do, you know I'm always here for you. What's going on? She said, this is the first day out of the hospital. I've been bedridden with a 1% chance of living. 9 months in a hospital. This was the first day out of the hospital. She was walking home. She made her boyfriend pull over and go for a walk because she said, if I die today, at least I want to feel the sand beneath my toes one more time. And that particular day changed my life because I realized that it's not about me, it's about we. When I was looking inward and reflecting on all the reasons my life sucked, I wasn't comparing myself to her because that's not the point, but I was comparing myself to the life that I had and that I really truly wanted to have. A year later, I was running at Torrey Pines, and I know that I have this running theme in place. I hate running. But I realize it's a means to an end to live the aspiring life that I want. You give me a ball, and I will chase it for hours and hours, and I will not get tired. But if there's no physical thing to chase after, I'm done. You've got to find your motivation. And yet you see what happened with Jenny is a year later, I shot a video. It was when I was Torrey Pines. I was coming back down, as you know that road that you lead up that you park on. where it's a heck to get a parking space sometimes. I was coming over that same spot at which I met Jenny that morning, and this amazing emotion came over me. And I took out my phone, much like Owen teaches, and I shot a video. It was my first real video, and I uploaded it to YouTube. A month later, I get a message from a woman, and she said, Lane, I want to thank you so much. Can I please take you to lunch? Now, at that point, I could actually afford lunch, but a free meal to the guy, right? Sometimes the best way to the guy's heart is through. And so I took her up on the opportunity. We went to lunch, and at the end of it, she offered to pay for my meal, and I said, I appreciate that so much, but what are you doing? Why are you doing this? She said, Lane, you shot a video a little while back about being at rock bottom. My daughter has been living overseas in France for the last year. She's attempted to commit suicide 6 times. She watched your video and she wants to live again. And guys, understand this is not about me. It's just my lowest point in my life, and maybe that's where you are right now. Understand that those hardest times for you, Alan, when you're through your journey after you get out from the Navy, are going to be some of the hardest times you ever experienced. But when you have to get through it, understand, like my mom fighting for 35 years as a breast cancer survivor, that's why I get up. There's nothing I could ever go through of all the chemo that she had to go through, tear and rip her body apart, but never her soul. And guys, what I love about this story is that it doesn't end there. You see, what happens is the more that we live, the more that we can revive people who are the walking dead out there. And somebody mentioned earlier that at the end of the day, the most wealth is in the ground, 6 feet. But what I want you guys to understand is this, that as I look back on the time before Jenny came to me, and you want to talk about elevating your life, sometimes we've got to go back to that dark places because, as the Bible suggests, foundation is built on solid ground. And sometimes when you're at rock bottom, it's the best place to build from, because if you build it on sand, it's going to collapse. And too often we go through life and we build our businesses on solid sand. We build our values on solid sand because it's somebody else that has suggested that we should live a life like that. Until you truly get to know who you are and what operates you, why you are who you are, and what lane you're supposed to be in, you're going to be living somebody else's thing, driving their vehicle for the rest of your life. And as I continue to just live my life over and over and over and over again, I want to understand that every single thing we do, like the Pythagorean theorem, is a stepping stone to the next thing. This event, for many of you, you will walk away not understanding why you came here. You may say, wow, those speakers were okay, but the reality is that something they said got in your heart, and a year later, when you need that connection, they'll be there for you. And you see, before Jenny came up to talk to me, I had gotten down on my knees for the first time to pray, and I literally got down and I hit my eye on a rock. The hardest day of my life, I now am throbbing. It's black and blue, I can tell. I'm so mad and so livid that I take this rock and I'm about to throw it into the ocean. And I look at this and I'm about to throw it and I say, my freaking eye, this rock. And I realize at that moment that I rock. I rock. And guys, understand this, that at your lowest moment, when you feel like you're at rock bottom, that is the best place to build from, because you are the rock and foundation of your business, your life. God has given you an opportunity to go live and fulfill it, not for what you want, but He wants in and through you. And I challenge you guys that when you go out and fulfill your dream, when you find your lane, you make the shift, take your life into overdrive and get into the fast lane, I can guarantee that you rock, I rock, we walk, and together we can go faster and further. God bless, and thank you. Hang on a second.
You have an event coming up anytime soon? I know we kind of talked about your kind of together.
So here's a quick rundown. Promotionals, right? You guys have to be promoting yourself. I talk about prospecting. What I want to do is I want to acknowledge Brenda Geary, if she will stand real quick. Brenda is, give it up for Brenda! Brenda is an amazing part of our team, and Rob, if you will stand as well. Rob Campbell, give it up for Rob. Both of these people have been in one of my books, and part of what we do is we help you tell your story to get it out there. If you want to be a speaker, coach, mentor, you got to have a book. We talked about it earlier, and the book doesn't really make you the money. It's behind the book that you're going to create that. And so part of what we do is we help people do that. And Brenda's part of our book called Life in the Fast Lane. Right now I've gone around, I didn't even talk about this because I'm going to invite you to come to our event in which I'm going to talk about the 120-day journey that I just went on, driving every single state 30,000 miles, and then the proposal that I did in Hawaii for 50 first dates. It's changed my life forever, and I got engaged recently on that trip. But understand this, it wasn't about me. I was going around interviewing the founder of Priceline, the founder of the Make-A-Wish Foundation, Kevin Harrington from Shark Tank, all these amazing people. And we're inviting you guys to come along the journey and allow us to tell your story in the book with them so we can borrow the credibility, because together we can go faster and further. And if that's something you want to do, come talk to me. You're going to get to come to the event. And if anybody wants to do that, I'm happy to sell you guys tickets here. We can give some kind of discount, but I didn't come for that. I would much rather you guys come to me and say, Lane, I want to donate $1,000 instead of giving you that money. I'm happy to take that. We'll give it to a charity, and you can still come to my event. Guys, understand, I didn't teach you my 5-step process, and for any of you guys that want a free consultation, I'll continue teaching and coaching you. Life has nothing to do with where we're going, it's who we can bring along the journey with us. And I applaud you for the things that you're doing, because I see women continuing to do what they do, having been a teacher. So if you want to come talk to me about the book, that's a different thing. That's obviously an investment of your finances. If you want to come to my event, just come make a tithe and an offering. Gives to something, we'll choose a charity, or you can just give to mine, and I'm happy to invite you to our event that we're going to do with Brenda and everybody else in the book later in San Diego. Cool?
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
You know, people say that they're not going to sell something, and it's